Today we are going to be going over our power rankings for Week 15 of the 2024 NFL season. Before we get into this video, make sure you comment down below what you agree with and what you disagree with, and also make sure you subscribe as it helps the channel out a lot. Without further ado, let's get into these power rankings. So the first group we have is the Giants at 32, Patriots at 31, Raiders at 30, Jags at 29, and the Titans at 28. Giants, I think, are clearly the worst team. Yeah, they kept it close versus the Saints, but I just think they're in that bottom tier of these teams that are fighting for that first overall pick. I know that the other teams outside of this can also still get the first pick, but I think these are the teams that actually could use the first pick. Patriots at 31, as well as the Raiders at 30. I kept them. They were originally above the Jags, but the Jags did come away with a win versus the Titans, an ugly win, but they still got the win. So although the Patriots didn't play and the Raiders didn't play terribly against the Bucs, at least later on, I think the Jags getting that win deserves to catapult them above the Raiders and the Patriots. I kept them the same order. Patriots didn't play, so I kept them below the Raiders, who didn't play terrible against the Bucs. And then the Titans at 28. I know the Jags beat them, but the Jags were at 31 going into the week. Titans were at 26, and it was a close game. And I think the Titans have just played a lot better throughout most of the season. And I think most of the time the Titans would beat the Jags in a head-to-head. So and again, they had that ranking above them, but it could be flipped either way. Next group, we have the Browns at 27, the Cowboys at 26, the Jets at 25, the Bears at 24, Saints at 23, and the Panthers at 22. Browns, I know they lost to the Steelers, but it wasn't the biggest blowout in the world. And again, I do think they are better than the Titans. With the Titans losing to the Jags, I feel comfortable putting the Browns above the Titans. Cowboys at 26. They kept it close with the Bengals. Their run game has slowly figured it out. I know it wasn't against the best run defenses in the Bengals and the Giants, but the Cowboys' run game is slowly picking up. Cooper Rush hasn't played horrible, and if it wasn't for them failing to recover their own blocking the Cowboys' punt, they could have won that game. And again, with them and the Browns, another 50-50, but I haven't been terribly disappointed with the Cowboys over the last 3 or so weeks, and we'll see how they play against a team similar to them in the Panthers. Jets at 25, another team that did lose, but Aaron Rodgers had his first 300-yard passing game in like 2 years, and they were in a close game versus a pretty good Dolphins team, took them to overtime. I like what I've seen from the Jets recently as well. Garrett Wilson had a great game. Devontae Adams played good. Obviously, when Aaron Rodgers throws for 300, that's going to likely happen. But I liked what I've seen from the Jets, for the Jets standards in the last few weeks. And then another team that did lose, but this time, instead of keeping it close and giving them hope, like the Browns, the Cowboys, or the Jets, the Bears just did not look good against the Niners. I think they had 4 yards in the first half. I'm pretty sure I saw a thing that they had more punts than yards. I think they had 5 punts in the first half, 4 offensive yards. So they did lose, but instead of having a good loss, it was an ugly loss. So I think they deserve to be lower than a team like the Saints, who did win, and a team like the Panthers, who we'll get into later. And with the Saints at 23, it was an ugly win. It was against the worst team in the Giants, but a win is a win. And I think they proved a little bit more than the Bears this most recent week. However, although the Panthers lost, I gave them the spot above the Saints, as for the 3rd week now, in a losing effort against a good team, the Panthers have kept the game competitive. They kept the game down to the wire, and they could have won for the 3rd straight week if it wasn't for that drop pass. Bryce Young didn't have his greatest game, but when the game was down to the wire, he stepped up. He's showed them promise. He's showed that he could be a future franchise quarterback. And despite the loss, I think they have shown a lot more than the Saints have in these last 3 or 4 weeks. So I gave them the spot above them. Next group, Falcons at 21, Bengals at 20, Colts at 19, and the Cardinals at 18. Falcons, ugly loss versus the Vikings. Kirk Cousins has not looked good these last 3 or 4 weeks. However, I do think they are better than the Panthers, the Saints, the Falcons, and the Jets, so I didn't want to move them too far. Even though it hasn't looked great recently. Bengals at 20. If they would have lost to the Cowboys, they might have been in that 23 to 24 range, but they did get a win. It wasn't the prettiest win, but Jamar Chase still had himself a great game. Joe Burrow, the offense in general, even Chase Brown had himself a very good game. And they did get the win. However, I don't think they deserve to be above the Cardinals or Colts just yet. Colts won, they didn't even play this week, so I didn't want to put them below a team like the Bengals for not playing when they've, I think, looked better as a overall team this season than the Bengals have. And then the Cardinals, yes, it wasn't a great game versus the Seahawks, and yes, they haven't played their greatest of football recently. I still do think they are, again, just like the Colts, a much more complete and better team than the Bengals. So I think they deserve this 2 spot to have those spots above the Bengals. But again, that Bengals offense is insane. If they just even had a half decent defense, they could potentially be a threat in the playoffs, but not with the defense they have. So, next group we have is the Niners at 17, Dolphins at 16, Rams at 15, and the Bucks at 14. Yes, it wasn't against the best team, but the Niners looked about as close to the Niners that we know as they have almost all year. They looked like themselves again for the first time since what they played. Was it the Patriots they played week 1? I'm not sure. And they didn't even have Brandon Ayuk. They didn't even have McCaffrey. They didn't even have Jordan Mason. And they still looked very good against a Bears team who at times will be competitive. So a very impressive win. But I just think the overall season they've had, and since it was the Bears, I think the Dolphins, Rams, and Bucks deserve those spots just above them. But the Niners are definitely climbing up. Dolphins at 16. I didn't decide to make any changes around them. I think the Rams and Bucks deserve to jump them, as the Bucks, yes, it wasn't the best win, but they still got a much better win against the Raiders than the Dolphins did against the Jets, and the Rams had their incredible win versus the Bills. But I didn't want to lower them below the Niners. I think they've been better than the Niners, just slightly. So I kept them at 16 for their, they pulled it through in overtime. Jonnu Smith carried that overtime drive, and they got the win. So I left them at 16. Rams, as I mentioned before, had their great win over the Bills, jumped up 4 spots. I think the biggest jump up this week, as they're looking pretty good. I think last year they started off slow and picked it up late. Puka's had himself a great stretch. Same with Stafford. And Cooper Kupp, guys like Cooper Kupp, Kyren Williams, who maybe aren't playing are having as insane of a stretch as Stafford or Puka are having, they're still having their own great performances as well. And then the Bucks, as I mentioned, they had their good win versus the Raiders. It wasn't the cleanest win. Same with their win against the Panthers 2 weeks ago. But they're getting wins. Their defense is keeping them in the game enough for their offense to score the points they need. And I think the Rams are just too far down the power rankings based on the weeks before, to jump the Bucks. But they are very close. And both those two teams are playing very good recently. Next group is the group of teams that didn't change. We have the Seahawks at 13, Texans at 12, Commanders at 11, Broncos at 10, and the Chargers at 9. Seahawks on a little bit of a win streak. They started off like 4-0, then they lost 3 straight or 4 straight, and now they've won 5 straight. It's weird. Or 4 straight. Very impressive win over the Cardinals. Zach Charbonnet looked great. Geno Smith continues to play good football. Their defense is playing good enough as well. And I think I didn't want to move them because the 3 teams above them didn't play. But I didn't want to move them down either because they did get a win, and it was against a pretty good Cardinals team. As I mentioned, the Texans, Commanders, and Broncos, all 3 teams did not play last week. All of them had a bye. And so I didn't feel like changing them because I think the order of these 3 teams is pretty fair. And I don't know if the Seahawks, Bucks, or Rams or Dolphins have done enough recently to take over those spots. Because not just last week. I know the Rams had their great win over the Bills, but it's more of the last 3 to 4. And then the Chargers at 9. I know they lost to the Chiefs. It was a close game. Shocker. A close a team loses a close game to the Chiefs. But they've played well. Herbert continues to fight through all the pain that he always faces every year. And they didn't even have Ladd McConkey. They did that all without Ladd McConkey. Quentin Johnson stepped up. So I think they deserve to stay at 9 because they played good. But they did lose. And I think the two teams who also lost and didn't play deserve to keep that spot just above them. And those two teams, including the other teams that are in this group, are the Packers at 8 and the Ravens at 7, as well as the Vikings at 6 and the Steelers at 5. Packers at 8. I know they lost, but it was a very close game versus the Lions. They showed that they can be a good team. The Lions are just better. I think if the Packers play like that against any other team, maybe outside the Bills, they can win that game. But the Lions are just better. So I think they proved that they are one of the top 10 teams and potentially even one of the top 8 teams. And then the Ravens at 7, I know they didn't play, but they haven't looked great the last 3 or 4 weeks. The only reason they weren't moving too much is because they were still getting wins here and there, and they were still playing good. But I think with the games that the Steelers and the Vikings had, I can finally move the Ravens down, even though they didn't play. But again, they're still at 7. And then, as I mentioned, Steelers, great win over the Browns. Vikings, very good win over the Falcons. I didn't move them over the other 4 teams, potentially controversially, based on how the Steelers and Vikings have played recently. I just think the Steelers did it against the Browns, who are 27th, and the Vikings did it against the Falcons, who are 21st. And even if you look into before the week, Falcons were 20th, and the Browns were 28th. Great wins regardless, still very good teams, but I would just keep those other 4 teams just above them. 3 of those teams are the Chiefs at 4, Eagles at 3, Bills at 2. I know the Chiefs, another close win, but they're getting wins. However they need to do it, they're getting wins. And again, if they lose games, that's when they'll fall. And if the Steelers, I think the Steelers play the Eagles, if I'm not mistaken. If the Steelers beat the Eagles, they'll 100%. If the Steelers play the Eagles well, they'll probably jump the Chiefs, especially if the Chiefs continue to just win by 3 points. But I wanted to keep the Chiefs at 4. Again, another situation where it could go either way. Eagles at 3. I know they won, but it was a very close win and an ugly win versus the Panthers, they're not dead last like they used to be, but they're still towards the bottom. So you would like them to maybe win that a little more convincingly, especially at home, and especially against a not great defense. A little upset with Hurts only having like 100 passing yards. Saquon yards per carry numbers were great, but he only had 120. I know, only 120. But they probably could have gave him the ball like 30 times and would have won this game easily. And then Bills at 2. I know they lost. You lose to the 15th best team, and you stay at 2. I just wasn't impressed with the Eagles. I wasn't impressed with the Chiefs. And I think despite the loss, Josh Allen played great, and I still think the Bills are the second best team in football. If they lose again, then we'll have some questions, but I think it's fine to keep the Bills at 2. And then the last spot, it's obvious. The best team is the Detroit Lions. They continue to be the best team. They just beat the 8th best team in the league going into the week, the 7th best team, at least in my power rankings. And they know how to win games. They were just blowing teams out, and when they were blowing teams out, there was a little bit of me that was like, are they winning games too easily? But now they had to win a tough close game versus the Bears. They had to win a tough close game versus the Packers, and I think those games are going to help them maybe even more than the 50-point wins versus the Jags and Titans that they had earlier in the year. So I think these close wins are good for the Lions if they want to try and win the Super Bowl. But I think they're clearly the best team, and I don't think it's a question, especially with the Bills losing too. Because you can make an argument that the Bills are the best team or the Eagles, but with how those two teams played, it's not even close that it's the Lions. That will conclude our power rankings for Week 15 of the 2024 NFL season. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like, subscribe, And let me know in the comment section your thoughts and opinions. I'll see you guys next time. Peace.